I really began to realize that shame lives in darkness. And the more shameful we are about anything, the less likely we are to take in truthful and logical information about it, right? So people are very embarrassed and shameful about debt, so they hide it. And when you hide something, you're not seeking out the right information. You're doubling down on the wrong things. And so I began to see that simply talking about bankruptcy as a normal legal option was in and of itself innovative. It was pretty cutting edge. And I began to talk about my theories of finance. I believe we have to get through debt very quickly to get to the other side so we can rebuild wealth, so we can get back in the game. And people started to respond to that, and I could see that I was making changes. I was making headway with people stop worrying about what everybody else thinks and start taking care of themselves.
Welcome to the Founding Partner Podcast. Join your host, Jonathan Hawkins, as we explore the fascinating stories of successful law firm founders. We'll uncover their beginnings, triumph over challenges, and practice growth. Whether you aspire to launch your own firm, have an entrepreneurial spirit, or are just curious about the legal business, you're in the right place. Let's dive in.
Welcome to Founding Partner Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Hawkins. I'm excited for our guest today. She has built a pretty big TikTok following, which I'm really interested in hearing about. And she's done some other cool things too. She's sold a practice. She's redesigned her practice to fit her life. And I want to dig into all of that. So Adrienne Hines, welcome to the podcast. Why don't you briefly introduce yourself, and then we'll dig in.
Thank you, Jonathan. First, thank you for having me on your podcast. I've listened to this podcast, and I really appreciate it and enjoy it. And I picked up things along the way as I was trying to make some of my own decisions. So it's an honor, really, to be here. My name is Adrienne Hines, and I am an attorney in Northwest Ohio. I have been practicing now for 28 years, and I had historically been a regular lawyer on a partnership trajectory, and I lived that life that I think we all thought was the way to go. And along the way, I became restless and aware that maybe there might be other options out there for me. I started to make some pretty bold changes in my life and my career, and some things that were happening in my family life were helping to propel that forward. But as I sit here today, I am no longer a partner in my firm, and I have a small bankruptcy practice that I handle myself of counsel to my former partnership firm. And I spend half the day as a bankruptcy lawyer, and I spend half the day as a bankruptcy influencer on the internet. And that's what brings me here.
I want to hear all about that. So let's go back. So your firm, and I'll call it the traditional career path for lawyers, we'll say. And so you were a named partner at that firm, right?
Correct.
So take us through the evolution of that. Was it the only firm you ever worked with, or were you somewhere else first and then you broke off and formed that firm? Take us through that.
Yeah, so it was a pretty straight line because my parents were divorced when I was very young, and my mother ended up remarrying a lawyer. And before she had met him, I had believed in my mind I was going to become a lawyer, so it felt it was meant to be. And I went to college and law school and really looked up to him, my stepfather, and I ended up joining his firm. He was a senior partner in his firm. It was a small firm with 4, 5, 6 lawyers. That's how it's always been. And I essentially worked at the knee of my dad and learned everything that he was doing. And I became a miniature version of him, a female, newer, younger version of him, but still very much in his shadow and learning things the way he did things. I began to get restless after COVID. COVID was really what opened my eyes and made me realize that there was just a lot more going on. And I started to see opportunity everywhere. I suddenly was able to step away from the day-to-day world that I was living, the grind. And I looked around, and it was a real time of creativity for me to see what was happening. I all of a sudden had no choice but to spend some time on the internet, and I was starting to see how creative other people were being in this complicated time. And I started to sense and recognize that there was tremendous opportunity in ways that I had not considered up until that point. And so I began to get a bit restless. I really liked working out of my home. I'd always been somebody who wanted to be on the road. I was always the one going to court. I was always the one who just wanted to get out of the office. And it was really nice to not have to be in an office. That was delightful for me. And it was becoming very clear that I was becoming restless. One of the things that was happening is I had become a workers' comp specialist in the state of Ohio. We have specialty designations. My dad was a workers' comp specialist. I was a workers' comp specialist. And workers' comp was our moneymaker. Like injury work is where we were making our money. I was doing bankruptcy work on the side for a couple of reasons. First is that I had interned with a federal bankruptcy judge in law school, and so I had a relationship with a judge who was really trying to encourage me to do it. Secondly, my workers' comp clients, the system was so fragile that a lot of my clients would end up needing to file for bankruptcy because their claims were being contested. And so I really started doing it to help them, to make my mentor happy. But along the way, I began to realize that these were my people. Like this was what I really enjoyed doing. And the contrast between my injury work and bankruptcy was becoming much more obvious. My workers' comp practice was becoming more fragile and more chaotic, more politically driven, more unsafe in my eyes. And I was having complicated conversations with clients, lowering their expectations, a lot of disappointment. But if I talk to a bankruptcy client, I can usually take them from sadness to joy in about 15 or 20 minutes, 85% of the time. And those odds were really dragging me forward and showing me that I needed to lean into the things that I really liked. And that's really what started my movement away from my named partnership. And that's how it began.
I like that journey. Often we lawyers, we get started and we just get swept into this current and we just go and we don't have that moment to step back and reflect. COVID was a crazy time in all sorts of ways, but I think for a lot of people, it allowed us to detach a little bit from or get out of that current, I'll say, and start to reevaluate things. So that makes a lot of sense to me. Back to your firm real quick. You did workers' comp. Was the firm sort of a workers' comp firm? Did you do other personal injury work? How did that fit into the firm overall?
I would say we had a really unique firm. We had always been very independent lawyers. And so our firm was created in a way that I don't think is all that common now that I talk to other people. But my dad and I were in charge initially of the contingency department. So for many years, we were the personal injury and the workers' comp, the med mal, that was all us. And then I had a partner who did all criminal work. And then I had a partner who did all estate work, and he was a part-time judge. And then we had a lawyer who just did domestic relations. So we had all these pieces to the general pie of the needs in our community. And we each had our own budget. So my dad and I and our staff, we would budget ourselves so we could pay ourselves what we wanted, but we had to bring it in. So it was and then we eventually brought another attorney in. He'd come over from another firm, and it was very clear he had an amazing trajectory in front of him in personal injury. He was young and he was hungry and he was paying attention and he's a level up guy and he is doing an amazing job. So we handed off the PI to him, and my dad and I continued the workers' comp and the bankruptcy. When I finally made the decision to leave, it was the personal injury attorney that I went to talk about what to do with the workers' comp practice, because by then my dad had retired.
Yeah, so let's talk about it. So you started to get these other interests and think about designing your life maybe in a different way. And you said, all right, I think I want to ditch the workers' comp practice and do other things. I think, we'll call it, you sold the practice or they bought you out of the partnership? Is that how you would describe it?
Yeah, I want to say that the straw that broke the camel's back for me was in May of 2023. My husband was in a near fatal plane crash.
Oh, man.
And after his plane crash, it was pretty bad. He is doing great. He's almost fully recovered. So we're very fortunate. But it was that May of 2023 that the urgency became very clear. Things became clear to me. I needed to be with my family. I needed to be with him. He was older. My husband and I took stock of our lives and we're like, how much money is enough? How much do we really need? Is it worth it? If bad things happen, what does money help us? So that was the moment that we really started to buckle down and start to figure out how to gently, carefully, but responsibly step away from this practice that I was largely in charge of. And so it still took me another 9 months to get the nerves up and figure out exactly what I was going to do. And I knew that it was going to be difficult to support myself with just the bankruptcy work. So I was all along trying to build up my social media account. And it got to the point where I was successful enough on the social media side that I felt like it was time that I could make that jump. And I went to my personal injury partner and discussed with him handing over my practice to him. What our arrangements were aren't really the point, and they're confidential. But what I will say is that at all times, I had tremendous amount of respect. These are guys that I've been with. I've been riding with them for years and years. We go on vacations together. We're very close. And I think they were upset initially that I was leaving, that I was bailing, that I was breaking up the club. But I also recognized that I was moving in a direction that they weren't quite moving in, and I was becoming odd. And I appeared as if I wasn't working as hard as them. And I understood that's how they were perceiving my actions. And that's when I knew it was probably time to start moving on. And so initially they were frustrated and upset because I'd been with them for a long time. But I was also very clear that I would continue to help, that I cared about the practice that had been built over all these years that my dad had handled, that I had handled. We had clients that were 30 years. So I cared a lot about my practice, and I wanted very much for it to continue in the hands of somebody who wasn't as downtrodden on it as me, somebody who could breathe a little bit of life and really start to pivot and help our workers' comp clients. So there's no question. I feel like I left some money on the table, but I did it very knowingly and willingly because I wanted it to continue a good relationship with them, and I wanted them to succeed. And I knew that doing that would help them succeed. And in so doing, we negotiated a very good of counsel deal for me. And I still have the comfort of having a structure around me. And my paralegal was paid through the firm, through the system. So I don't have to worry about details like payroll, and I don't have to worry about ordering supplies and all those things. It's built into a budget, and it's basically a rental payment that I pay every month. And I have to bring the money in, and if I don't have enough money from my bankruptcy practice, I have to write a check. But if I have overages, it's profit for me. So that is essentially what we've done. My of counsel agreement has very delineated obligations on both the firm side and my side. They have to provide me an office. My paralegal uses that office, and I work out of the home. So I have a lot of freedom in that way. So I've really taken the part that I love the most, and I've been able to find a way to do the things that I like while still building something, while still having tremendous growth potential, while still having the opportunity to morph it into something as we go along. And that's what's pretty exciting right now.
There's a lot to unpack there. And I guess I'll start with number one, you deciding it's time for a change. And then even though law firm partnerships break apart or change for a lot of different reasons, and then if somebody's leaving to basically create a competitor or to go to a competitor, it gets really strained. But even when you're not, I've seen it where people, they just get upset. It can be for all sorts of reasons. Even if you're not going to compete, you're basically giving them your practice and all these things. And I understand how that can be emotional, and I'm glad you guys got through it and got through it enough where you're still with the firm, you're of counsel. And that's another thing that I think not enough attorneys sort of consider that kind of relationship as a good alternative. It's almost riding a bike with training wheels. So you want to put all this time in the social media, which we'll get to in a minute. You want to focus on the bankruptcy practice, ditch the other stuff, have the support of the firm, but then also have the freedom to do these other things. And of counsel is a really good way to do that, especially if you structure it where I assume you can work as much as you want or as little as you want. Like you said, if you don't bring enough money in, you might stroke them a check, but it's up to you whether you want to do it or not, right?
That's exactly correct. And that was largely the point, is so that I could have the autonomy and control. I could come and go and not feel guilty, and they could see me come and go and know that I'm not getting a paycheck from them, and they don't have to worry about what it is I'm doing. So it is tremendously advantageous if you're in a good place with your partnership. And again, when I say that some people were a little upset, or we're friends, they were like, why are you, we had a plan. And I get it. It was very short lived, and it was not anything big. And I love them all very much. And I'm very grateful to them. And it's a testament to the fact that we have such an amazing relationship that we were able to make this change respectfully and authentically and transparently.
So let's dig in a little bit on the bankruptcy thing. You touched on it a little bit. I know a lot of sort of personal injury workers comp type attorneys that say they really like fighting for their clients, and it's a calling to them. It sounds like bankruptcy is like a calling for you. So why don't you take us through that? How did you discover it, and how did you find that sort of magic that you've found?
It's ironic because I'm not really good with numbers, which is why I just assumed that it would just never be a practice for me. When I interned with the federal bankruptcy judge in law school, the irony is I left that semester-long internship more confused than I was when I went in. And so it's a surprise to me that I ended up in bankruptcy, because it wasn't on my bingo card when I was coming out of law school. But along the way, number one, I realized that the bankruptcy law is pretty straightforward. It can be a bit nuanced, and there can be, if this happens, then this happens. If A happens, then Y happens. If B happens, then X happens. So you have to understand those types of spokes in the wheel. But it's a pretty transparent process, and there's no emotion in it. And people come to me very emotionally, and if I'm able to calm them down, take a deep breath, and let them look and see what their choices really are, that's when people start to understand what they can do. So it's no surprise that I was a psychology and sociology double major with a minor in philosophy, right? I'm a humanitarian kind of girl. I wasn't in math or science. I don't have any of those skills, but I have a lot of empathy, and I have an ability to sit and talk to somebody and understand what it might be like to walk in their shoes. I'm very non-judgmental, and I found that was my lane, to calm people down, help them take emotion away from what they were dealing with, and to start to show them their real, true options, and to talk about them as if they're normal options and not outrageous and not crazy. And once people start to hear the reality of their situation, the true options that are available, why most of them are unsafe, and if I can walk them through this, they can usually see that there's an amazing solution to their problems literally right in front of them. And so I really leaned into these people, and I feel for them because I'm a little messy with money, right? And I was raised by a single mom, and I know what it's like to struggle with money. And I know how ridiculous it is to say, just pay your bills, when you don't have money to pay your bills. And I really began to realize that shame lives in darkness. And the more shameful we are about anything, the less likely we are to take in truthful and logical information about it, right? So people are very embarrassed and shameful about debt, so they hide it. And when you hide something, you're not seeking out the right information. You're doubling down on the wrong things. And so I began to see that simply talking about bankruptcy as a normal legal option was in and of itself innovative. It was pretty cutting edge. And I began to talk about my theories of finance. I believe we have to get through debt very quickly to get to the other side so we can rebuild wealth, so we can get back in the game. And people started to respond to that. And I could see that I was making changes. I was making headway with people stop worrying about what everybody else thinks and start taking care of themselves. And I will say that you had a guest on not too long ago, Len, and he said something that really struck with me. He said, you have to deeply care about your community. And I thought to myself, I deeply cared about my audience. I deeply care about what's happening to them, their fears, and I feel oftentimes like I'm on the bow of a ship, safe and dry with a coat on, and I'm looking over the bow into the water, and there's just people flailing around, and they're grabbing onto each other, right? And they're hateful towards each other, and they're mad. And I'm just saying, there's a life raft right behind you. And every once in a while, somebody will turn around and they'll grab it. And that's what it feels like to be a bankruptcy lawyer sometimes.
I can tell that you are a very empathetic person. I can just tell. So I'm sure that is extremely comforting to these folks and helpful for you in your practice. And maybe it's your psychology / all your background there. But yeah. So I got a question. So this is something that's a big issue. It involves bankruptcy, but really not, because it's the student loan issue that so many younger people are it's albatross of all albatrosses, right? And currently you cannot discharge that in bankruptcy. And it seems like the solutions people are floating out there are, let's just forgive it all. Let's just forgive it. And of course, it gets a lot of people mad. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on it? You probably see a lot of it out there. And then is that something you think should be dischargeable in bankruptcy?
This is very controversial. I understand that. But I think that most people who are just lay people coming to the table don't think anybody should be able to discharge any kind of debt. If you sat down and asked them if they should be able to discharge credit card debt, those people would say no. And if you ask them if Johnson should be allowed to file bankruptcy and reorganize, they would say no. There are just a lot of people out there who won't ever understand where they fit into the world's economy and how they got there. The reality is that you and I know is that student loans have gotten out of control. Maybe about 15 years ago, I had a client who came to me, and she had gone to Bowling Green State University right outside of Toledo, Ohio, for 2 whole years. And she came out with over $300,000 in student loan debt. Oh. $300,000. And of course, I dived down. What happened? What is going on? And she went there and just got a lot of student loan applications in the mail. And then she had a shady boyfriend. He's here, sign this. Let's get these student loans. She went to Vegas. She had cosmetic surgery. She had $300,000 of student loan debt, and she had to drop out after her second year. And the reality is that those student loans should have never been given to her. They weren't in connection. They weren't in conjunction with what she was doing. And so the problem that I have is that student loan lenders act in the same way that regular consumer lenders act. They act the way credit card companies act. They act the way payday lenders act sometimes. And so to that extent, student loan discussion is very similar to the discussion of why should anybody be able to discharge debt in bankruptcy? And the answer is because a lot of this stuff is predatory. And I think the reason why bankruptcy exists to get rid of credit cards and medical bills and personal loans and payday loans and all that, we call it general unsecured non-priority debt. The reason bankruptcy exists for that debt is because we know it is the most dangerous low-level priority debt. It's unsecured, right? And for that reason, those creditors get to take lots and lots of interest in exchange. But the problem with student loans is that they are not truly tied to need. And we are in an environment where the cost of education is just absolutely skyrocketing and exploding. 2 children in college we saved for them, and it is overwhelming. I think people who've been paying their student loans, like me, I'm 53 years old, my student loans are paid off. I think there's a lot of people like me who are not empathetic and who want to look backwards and say, I did it, you do it too. And I think that's antithetical to historically what America has been. Our parents wanted us to do better than them, and that's what seems to have been lost in that argument. I think we could overhaul the entire system, and I think there's a lot of ways we could have some solutions to this overwhelming, crushing student loan debt, but I don't think anybody's really ready to do a total overhaul of the system.
You know, it feels like to me, you hit on it, the lenders, it's like a moral hazard almost. It's like they know that they cannot get discharged in bankruptcy. So they're like, take the money. We'll just follow you for the rest of your life. Where if there was a risk that it could be discharged, they would be more careful in the underwriting department, I would think, and they would not give as much money. And then this is my theory, at least. And then the knock-on effect is the colleges that are just inflating the crap out of their fees and costs, they would then not have access to all this crazy free money that they have now. So then they would have to be a little bit more in control. And I think it would take some time to work through the system. But I just feel like instead of forgiving, because that doesn't fix any of the moral hazard stuff, just open it up to bankruptcy. And I got to say, too, people say, well, if you go to med school, I'm on my soapbox now, so sorry. But
I get it.
They say, well, if you go to med school, you should not be able to discharge all that debt. Going to bankruptcy is a big decision because it can affect all sorts of other things. So it's not one to make lightly. And just because you file bankruptcy doesn't mean you meet all the parameters and you're going to get it discharged. So it's not like you just automatically get it wiped out. You know all that. But it just seems to me that they should open it up to at least allow bankruptcy to help clear some of these problems. And my other theory, and I'll let you go, is at some point there's going to be enough young people voting and they're going to make the change, I think, once they control stuff. But that's my soapbox. I'm off.
No, you and I are on the same path. I would particularly say that obviously student loans had an amazing lobby in 2005 when the bankruptcy laws were being overhauled. The educational lobby, the higher educational lobby was definitely lobbying with the student loan groups. But I will say that there is a distinction between federal student loans and private student loans. They're both non-dischargeable in bankruptcy. And if I could start dipping my toe into the changing this process, I would start with the private student loan lenders being able to go into bankruptcy. I think they're the ones who are really troubling and have troubling practices and are not very transparent. But that would be a very good place to start because they're awful.
Yeah, that's a good point there. Real quick, thanks for listening. If you're getting any value out of this podcast, please take 2 seconds to hit the subscribe button and leave a 5-star review. It would really mean a lot to me. Now back to the show. So I want to shift gears a little bit. You mentioned the plane crash that your husband had, which is extremely traumatic. I'm sure that's just crazy, sounds crazy. But another important part of your story that I just want to touch on is that recently your daughter passed away. And first I want to say very sorry for that. No parent wants to go through that. But I was curious, you can speak as much as you want or as little as you want about it, but I believe that probably you were already on the path to changing your life and your career to design it the way you want. And I'm sure that just continued you down that path. So if you want to speak about that, you can, but also to bring it back for all the other lawyers out there that are just burning it, what advice would you give to them as they are just barreling down the highway and maybe ignoring some of the personal stuff?
Yeah, great question. Thank you very much. We are still only months from this, not years. So it is still very fresh. I appreciate that. But I do love talking about her, and she played a very important role in how it is I ended up here. After my husband's plane crash in May of 2023, very shortly after that, our son, we had twins, boy-girl twins. Our son was at Ohio State. Our daughter was at Denison. And after that school year, when my husband's accident happened, she came home and it became very clear that our daughter had developed a drinking problem, an alcohol problem. And so after my husband's crash, we spent the next 6 months really trying to navigate that with her. She tried to go back to college and came home and checked herself into rehab. She spent her 22nd birthday in rehab. And what came out of that was we brought her home and created a sober living environment for her as her next step in recovery. And she was doing amazing. And the advantage that we had at that time is that for the 10 months that she was sober before she passed, she was living in our house and I saw her every day and we talked a lot. And she was walking me through leaving the firm. She was very supportive of it. She was encouraging me to lean into the social media. And she's very empathetic like me. So she was just my biggest cheerleader in that regard. And when I left my firm, my last day was June 30th of 2024. And so July 1st was my very first day in my new world, my new reality. And my daughter passed away on July 30th. So I had 30 days with her. But I have a very popular LinkedIn post where I went through and I explained what had happened in the last moments I had with my daughter. And we were at the hospital. We had taken her to the hospital. We thought she had a kidney stone. She was sober 10 months. We thought this was a routine issue. She went into the hospital. They said, oh, it's not a kidney stone, it's pancreas. She's going to be here a couple days. And we're like, oh, what? All right. And we left her in a regular room, hospital room. It was my birthday. Left her in a regular room. Visiting hours were over. They said, come back tomorrow at 10. And through the night, she went into organ failure. So they called us at 5:45 in the morning and said, we need you to drive quickly and we need you to get here. And I still didn't quite understand what might be happening. I understood it was a big deal, but I didn't really see what was going on. And when we walked into the hospital, we heard the code blue being called, and they rushed us to her bed, to her room, and they were performing CPR on her. And I know your audience is probably really starting to get choked up here, but I want everybody to hear what happened to me in that moment because it truly helped me to get to the point where I am right now. I'm not super religious. I'm just a regular person trying to figure out life. But as I was watching them perform CPR on her, I glanced down at my watch, and I will never forget it was 7:07. And I felt like as I was looking back up, I just had this flash of images through my brain, just a million images in 4 seconds or less. And it's hard to explain how they flip through there. And some of them were little snippets of videos or little memories that I had. They were all of my daughter, but they were very decidedly all after school memories. Now, they weren't when she was born, they weren't her first walking, they weren't even Christmas time or holidays. They were after school memories or memories that I had when I had to leave the office. And my brain was saying to me, aren't you glad you didn't work any more than you had? Aren't you so glad you were at that tennis meet? You were at that play. You were at that PTA meeting. And in that moment, any kind of resentment or frustration or feeling like I had been left behind in my career, everything was gone. I had such tremendous peace in what I had done with my life and my career. And I thought to myself, I'm not sure how I would have been able to stand here watching this happen if I couldn't say to myself, I balanced it. I worked and I gave my kids what they needed. And I was just exceptionally grateful in that moment that my daughter and I had both had the time to work out everything. We were in a really great place. When she passed away, not a lot of people are in a good place with their 22-year-olds when they die. And she left me with this truly great feeling of just gratitude that I had crafted a career that fit me and that I wasn't putting my foot on the gas on something that wasn't working for me. And that was an extremely important moment for me. And it's something that I want other people to hear because when she was declared deceased at 7:15, so it wasn't long after that. But no money in the world could have saved her. I was at a hospital in the United States and we had health insurance and all the things, and none of the money that I had made all those years doing injury work, nothing mattered. None of it mattered. And I hope that other people understand that this thing we call life is crazy and complicated and confusing, but it's not any one thing. And we have to balance it and we have to give time to our people because that's really what we're here for.
Thank you for sharing. I saw that post, which was very impactful, but what you just said was even powerful for me. And I'm a big believer in designing your life for you. I think a lot of times people, like I said, get caught up in the current and they don't take the time to think about it. And I'm glad you were able to do that. I'm glad you had that moment. I'm sure that was extremely comforting and still is.
It was very comforting. Yeah. And I pray and I hope that anybody else who's in that situation will have that kind of peace. And that's really why I felt compelled to talk about it. And I think it's worthy.
Well, thank you. So I want to move on from that. Tough to move on from that, but maybe let's switch to TikTok. Let's talk about that. You mentioned earlier you got involved with social media. I guess the first thing is why and how? Was it your kids that got you there or did you just somehow catch the bug? How did you get involved there?
First off, I'm a pretty creative, out of the box individual to begin with. I have severe ADHD, and I was undiagnosed until COVID, until right before COVID, about 6 months before COVID. And I began to understand that I've been through a lot of things I'd done throughout my lifetime to try to fit into a box that maybe I wasn't. It finally occurred to me, maybe this isn't a box I fit into. I think that was just the ability to open my eyes in that regard. But yeah, I went to TikTok and social media. I wasn't a big fan of Instagram at the time. It felt a little fake and glossy. But my kids, when COVID happened, my children were seniors in high school. So their last sports season, they graduated, they had to go to college in that time frame. So we were hanging out a lot, and my daughter was going hard into TikTok. And it just so happened, and it's pretty funny, I went through menopause during COVID. And when I went through menopause, my hair went from straight to curly. I kid you
Wow.
not. My hair went from being a normal kind of wavy straight look to little orphan Annie. That's where I find myself now. And I actually went to TikTok to figure out what to do with my curly hair, because everyone was going to TikTok to learn things, learn how to hula hoop or learn how to, and there was this whole world of women who were like, let's try and see how curly we can get our hair. And that is actually why I first went to TikTok, because I'm messy and I'm vain, and I can go off on tangents and spend 3 hours looking at hair on TikTok. But I really loved the platform. I was getting a lot. I saw how different it was from other platforms. You were getting information in small little chunks, really delight an ADHDer's mind. And I just thought that this was going to be like a creative outlet, like Facebook. We put stuff up there so our friends see it. And that's really what I thought it was going to be. My very first video was about me running, and do a cute little video with sound and my footballs and all that stuff. I was being super creative. And then I started doing videos about me cooking random things, and nobody was interested, but I didn't care. That's not why I was doing it. And then one day I mentioned what it is I do. And I did a little video about things I would or would not do as a bankruptcy lawyer, and it went viral. It took off. And in that moment, I had an aha moment. I was like,
You got hooked. You got hooked, right?
oh, I got hooked. And what I realized is I was able to do the thing that I really, which is demystifying bankruptcy, helping people understand why it's not bad, helping people, I'm so scared. This sounds so scary. It's okay. Calm down. Deep breath. We're going to walk through this. Let me show you how this works. And I break it down in very simple, easy to understand terms. And that was easy for me, and I loved it. And so I don't put a lot of content out about me running or cooking anymore. I do every now and then, but I've got over 2,000 videos about bankruptcy, about pretty much every aspect. And every day I put several more out, and a lot of it's the same information said a little bit different ways, but people have responded to it. There's a lot of people out there who are afraid and don't know what their actual legal options are, and who've been making a lot of mistakes. And so it feels good to find them and help them.
Okay, so teach me about TikTok. I'm not on TikTok. I know about it. I've seen, if it makes its way to Twitter, sometimes the TikTok videos will be on Twitter and I'll see them there. So I'm not on TikTok. How did you learn how to do it? And then you've got a ton of followers. Take us through how that happened. And is it saying that it's flat, then all of a sudden you've got a ton, or is it a straight line up?
No. Yeah, no, it's a steady incline, and it starts off pretty flat. I think, first off, I'm a techie kind of person, right? I've got an iPhone, I've got an iPad, I've got my computer, I've got the watch. Like, I'm that person, right? I want the ring. I'm a techie person. I don't understand. I'm not a computer person, but I understand technology and I love it. And it didn't take me long to figure out how to use TikTok. It's not that complicated of a platform, but I was following my kids. And so I started an account, and my kids and I would follow each other. And then I'd see what they're seeing, and then they'd send some things to me. And then you start to curate kind of your own interests and stuff. The thing about TikTok is it's short little snippets of video just giving you information. There's not a lot of typing or there's not a lot of reading usually going on. It's a quick format. And it allows for people to ask questions. Like I put up a short video and people will ask questions. And a lot of how I built my account was curating it. I respond to every person's question, private or public. every single one. And I take a lot of the questions that are asked. If I do a video about, can you keep your car if you file bankruptcy? I'll do a video about it and I'll get 92 questions about
Wow.
cars. And so I take some of those and I make new videos off of what people are understanding from what I'm saying. So it begets itself. But again, going back to what Len Spada said, you have to care deeply about your audience for me. And I think that I really do care. I really do care about strangers out there coming across somebody who's going to make them feel bad about their debt versus somebody who's going to help them see that there's paths out of this forest. And I just kept doing it. And I would, every once in a while, you have a video that gets a lot of traction and then you get 5,000 more followers and it levels off again. It's a lot like this, ups, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And so it can be slow, but it has grown steadily and I've been very successful in that endeavor and it's very exciting.
That's cool. So, well, let me talk technical question. So how did you learn how to cut the videos, or is it you just film one video and that's it, or are you going in there and editing and cutting and doing different perspectives and all these things? How did you learn that part of it?
Great question. Years ago, I bought a digital camera and I didn't understand photography. I'd never taken any photography classes, but I was able to start a side business briefly where I took pictures of people, kids graduating from college, graduating from high school, families, weddings, that kind of stuff. And I didn't know what I was doing, but I understood that I had the eye for it. And I could have been an amazing photographer if I'd ever really figured out all of the f-stops and all of that stuff. I just wasn't really into figuring that out. So I think I've always had a very creative side to me. And I think I have a visually creative mind. And so I know what I like to see, and I've watched a lot of videos. And with TikTok is very easy. A lot of the times I'm recording in the TikTok platform. And so TikTok gives you very specific things you can do to edit videos. But I also know that TikTok is more likely to push out videos if you've created them in their platform, as opposed to creating them outside the platform and bringing them in. So a lot of the videos I make that are on TikTok are made in that TikTok platform. I have a lot of other video editing software that I don't use a lot. I want to get to the simple thing. And I think TikTok lends itself to a little bit more gritty, kind of on the fly videos. So that suits me a little bit better because I'm not super disciplined, right? I like to grab my phone and make a quick video, and I'll edit just the ums and the ahs, and maybe I'll put a little bit of music behind it and I'll throw it up. And I can do that walking into a grocery store these days because I'm just really fast at it. But it's a lot of real time. What am I thinking? And, oh, you got this question? Don't do that. That's crazy. Listen to me. Stop. Don't eat lunch before you hear this. So I'm responding a lot to the community that's coming at me. It's interesting.
This brings up sort of a couple things. There's a lot of lawyers out there that, first of all, there's so many different platforms. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I've started to dabble in Instagram. I have a Facebook account, but I'm never there. I do not do TikTok. I have a Twitter account and I lurk. I just got some Blue Sky accounts. So there's all these different things you can do out there.
Yeah.
And they're all a little bit different and they all have different personality. Yeah. I just wouldn't know what to do in TikTok. But let's say you can figure that out. But one of the big things, lawyers, they're scared of looking stupid. They're scared of being wrong. They're scared of taking a risk. So I guess 2 questions, really. How did you get over, if you did have any sort of initial fear of getting on here? And then what advice would you have for somebody out there that wants to get involved on some platform?
That is a great question, Jonathan, and it is relevant because there were 2 things happening as I was starting to put a little bit of content out about bankruptcy. Number one, I became exceptionally obsessed and anxious about what bankruptcy judges and the trustees in my community and my courts were going to say. I was monumentally afraid and embarrassed and terrified every time I put a video out that the Department of Justice through the U.S. Trustees Program was going to call me and tell me I'm in trouble somehow. And I dribbled stuff out slowly. And I was afraid of what my partners and the lawyers in my community would think because this feels like silly. And they didn't really understand what I was trying to do. And I'm not even sure I knew what I was trying to do at that point, other than to find some kind of balance, some kind of creative outlet. And I will say to you that At one point in time, one of my favorite bankruptcy trustees reached out to me to tell me that they thought that what I was doing was really cool. And then I had another bankruptcy trustee reach out to me who I'd gone to law school with. And she also reiterated that she thought my account was really neat and that I was doing a great job. And that alone gave me the giddy up to continue to do it. But I also began to realize one of these things that I felt like I've not been really clued into is asking for forgiveness, not permission. And I started to realize that so many other people around me were moving forward, not caring what anybody thought. And that's exactly what I was trying to get my audience to do, is to listen to me and take bold choices and do something scary because it's probably the right thing to do. And so I was able to push through that. But I have to tell you, I was terrified and was very concerned that maybe this was a big mistake by putting my life and my thoughts out there and having them dissected by the people with whom I practice law. And it turns out that even today, if anybody came in and said they had a problem, I would not care at this point. I know what I'm doing. I'm very clear, and I'm very comfortable with what I'm doing. But it was terrifying. And I can see how a lot of lawyers, I'm a risk taker. I look around, I see other people getting into trouble, and I think other people doing things, not getting into trouble. And I think if they're not even getting in trouble for commingling funds, like, how am I going to get in trouble for trying to help somebody? Be really nice to them. But what I have done, though, is I have gotten myself into the speaking world, right? And I've forced myself to do a speech to the National Association of Consumer Bankruptcy Attorneys in December about legal ethics and social media and AI. And it's forced me to make sure I'm on top of all of the things I'm doing, because I was not disciplined enough to go make sure I knew all those rules before I started.
That's going to be a good speech. You'll have to put that up on, so get a video of it and put it up on social media somewhere. It's funny, that initial fear, I've had it so many times in my career. I think back to my first deposition, I was scared shitless, and I didn't even have to ask a question. But when I first started posting on LinkedIn, you feel like you're exposing yourself and that somebody's going to come out and tell you're stupid or you got something wrong. But now I don't care. Just like you, it's just, I don't care. I just put it out there. If I'm wrong, I'll admit it and fix it or whatever. I just don't care. And it's
exactly. And wrong is in the eye of the beholder as well. And I just don't care anymore. I know that most of the information that I'm giving is exceptionally helpful and rooted in clear legal practice and thought. If I make a mistake every now and then, I'm learning that obviously things are very different around the United States. It's always, my clients can buy a car the day after they file bankruptcy. But I've learned in other jurisdictions, their courts make them wait until a bankruptcy hearing has been held. So I've learned a lot myself through this process. And then I'm able to incorporate that. I'm able to micro correct a little bit and say, in my jurisdiction, we can do this. In yours, you're going to have to ask your lawyer. So it's helped me understand more about the practice of bankruptcy as well, and how differently it can be done around the United States. That's been interesting for me.
So let's talk about some of the opportunities that you've come across your desk that now that you've blown up on TikTok in the bankruptcy space. What is probably open doors that you didn't even know existed? And I'm curious what sort of opportunities you've seen. How has that opened your mind? And maybe what's the next few years look for you as you look out there, as you've moved away from your traditional law practice and you're becoming more of an influencer? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so as my audience was starting to grow, and it was growing organically, I don't pay to grow my accounts or anything like that. It'd been growing organically, and I began to realize that I had something. I had an audience. I had a very loyal, and it was just growing. And I began to rack my brain as to what it was I could do to convert this, to monetize this in some way, while still without being a scammer, without doing anything that it wouldn't be in line with what I want to do. And I ended up, what's come across my desk are a lot of different opportunities. I've been in Newsweek, right? I've been in a lot of those things. I actually had a Hollywood casting agent came to me to discuss something that fell through.
That's pretty cool.
Who knows what comes from there? I've had some really interesting things happen from my TikTok, but what the most important thing I think that most of your listeners want to hear is that I found a way to monetize this. And one of the things I realized as my account was growing is people would say, can you represent me in New York? Can you represent me in Texas? Can you represent me? I live in Iowa. And the answer is no and no. I can only represent people in Ohio. And I'm only in the Northern Federal District because I'm too lazy to get into the Southern Federal District. So I can only represent you if you live in the northern half of Ohio. And the bigger my account grew, the more desperate people were. I need somebody, I need somebody. I went to a NACBA convention, the National Association of Consumer Bankruptcy Attorneys convention in 2023, and I started to get names and started to do research on people that might be able to help me monetize this. And I spent a whole year getting my account ready and doing everything that I wanted to do. And I went back to that convention and I cornered a couple of people, and they were very delighted that I cornered them. And what they had is they have a structure where they sell bankruptcy leads, right? They're bankruptcy marketing lead company. They do all sorts of areas of this, but they have a network of lawyers, and they've all primarily come from the National Association of Consumer Bankruptcy Attorneys. They're high-level, respected attorneys who are experienced. And so my followers who come to me, who say, can you help me? The answer is, I cannot help you, but there's a link in my profile, and we can pair you with a bankruptcy lawyer near you for a free consultation. And that's what I'm doing. I'm basically passing these people through to get them a free consultation with a bankruptcy lawyer near them. And then that lawyer pays for the lead. And so that is one way that I'm monetizing the account. And so, for example, I have usually about 200 leads per month are guaranteed to come through my account just on referring out. It has also increased my own business, right? My own Northwest Ohio business. I'm very robustly full. My calendar is full. But I've also started to take other pieces of the pie. So one of my biggest frustrations as a bankruptcy lawyer is that most people go into bankruptcy with negative equity, and we want them to surrender a car, but they're very untrustworthy about where they're going to get another car. And I found a dealership that only sells cars to people in or coming out of bankruptcy. And I love them. And I flew to Arizona to inspect their program. And now they are also in my referral program. So I'm trying to buttress up all the pieces of the pie, trying to provide mortgage help for people on the other side of a bankruptcy so they know what it's going to be like to buy a piece of property down the road, what they need to do to build their credit. My goal is to provide resources that are trusted for potential bankruptcy clients they can get from beginning to end safely, respectfully, with people who are going to do a good job for them without getting screwed over. That's what I've been building, and that's how I monetize my social media accounts.
That's really cool. And as you're saying all these things, I'm thinking of about 10 other ideas that I'm sure you've already thought of them, but I'm just like, wow, there's lots you can do there.
Imagine if I shifted to PI leads.
Oh gosh, I know.
Imagine, because I understand that world very well, but imagine if I took this audience and just started hammering PI leads.
There's lots of time there. Okay, so you've built this and you continue to build it. So how do you balance that with your law practice? How are you figuring out how much time to devote to each? Because at some point, I could imagine one could overwhelm the other.
I'm still navigating that. That is a good question because it is difficult to figure out where to put your energy. And one of the things, working with my business partner, who is a lead generator, marketing, all of these things, his team has taught me a lot about how to be a more effective and efficient bankruptcy lawyer. So I'm using some of their resources to start to help me. So for example, I'm using a service they offer to screen all my intakes because I'm a famous person. And so a lot of people call, and my staff don't have the time to sift through people who really aren't going to be moving forward, who just wanted to talk to me and just say, should I sell my truck or keep my truck? Like, we don't have time for that. I just did that about a month ago. And it's not cheap, but I think I'm going to start to see positive returns. And that is taking time and space away from my paralegal. And if we got 20 calls a week and only 8 or 9 of them really should be on my calendar, that is a huge savings for me. And those 8 or 9 that are on my calendar have already spoken spoken to experienced intake people, right, paralegals, who have walked them through a lot of stuff and understand what's going on with them. So that's one of the things that I've done. I'm not very good with my CRM system. I don't have a really good CRM system going yet because I'm still really connected with the firm, and I'm not really tied into some of what they're doing. And I think my needs might be a little bit different than their needs. So I'm working on trying to come up with an effective CRM system. But thankfully, I don't have to worry about malpractice insurance and all those things. Those are all being paid through the firm through monthly dues. Yeah, it's interesting.
You got a couple of fire hoses coming at you, and you just got to, that's
Yeah.
the challenge, but good challenge to have.
It's a labor of love. And again, I care deeply about these people. I really enjoy this community, feel exceptionally helpful, and I feel like I've got a lot of information that I'm happily willing to give away for free if anybody wants to listen to it. I think part of my job on social media is I really feel like I'm trying to take away shame and embarrassment from the discussion of debt. And I'm also trying to help every regular person out there level up and become an advocate for themselves. Even if they go to a lawyer, if they feel that lawyer is browbeating them, or if they're afraid of the lawyer, I want to teach them to what questions to ask and to flip the script. You're the consumer. They want you to pay them. You make them earn your business. So I feel like I'm trying to elevate my colleagues and the kind of care and service that we provide across the board, because it's clear to me that there's a number of them out there who are not probably doing the very best that they could do.
This is all really cool. I like what you're doing, and I know you're going to continue to really do some other cool things that probably you can't even imagine doing at this point. But so as we wrap this up, I always like to ask my guests any advice that they may have for other lawyers out there, other law firm owners. It could be somebody just starting out or somebody's been doing it a while. Any thoughts there?
I wish that in the beginning of my career, somebody had looked me in the eye and said, this isn't all. This isn't all there is. Keep your eyes open. There's so much opportunity everywhere. If I was younger, there's 1,000 other things I'd be doing in addition to this right now, just because I see opportunity. And I think don't put on the blinders. Life exists outside of the blinders. And not only is it important to craft a career that you're proud of and that you can at least enjoy more than half of the time you're enjoying it. We don't all enjoy everything we do, but also understand that you don't have to do this. There's other things to do. And you can do this for a while. There's always going to be another option down the road. So try it, see how it goes, but don't ever be afraid to move on. I wish I had known that, right? I wish somebody had just said that to me. I would have been more quick to embrace new ideas or new ways of doing things. I was definitely raised in an environment where it was, this is how we do it. And it took younger lawyers coming in for me to see that other people are starting to do things different ways, and I need to get on board with that. I think my advice would be more to people in my age category who've been doing things long time the same way. It's not necessary. Change feels good. And when you are standing in the shadow of something tragic and things have happened in your life, you're going to want to look back. How are you going to feel about your work, your home life, those types of things? That's what life is, right?
Yeah. Adrienne, I really enjoyed this. This has been fun.
Thank
and
you.
I'm not sure I'm going to get on TikTok, but if I do, I'm definitely going to go follow you.
That's okay. Keep an eye out for me on YouTube. We're going to start moving in that direction.
Perfect. So for people out there that want to find you, give us your TikTok handle and any other place where you want them to figure out where to find you.
Thank you. My handle on all my socials are at The Ladylike Lawyer, on Instagram, TikTok, The Ladylike Lawyer on Facebook and Threads and YouTube. But I also have a website, www.theladylikelawyer.com, and you can reach me there. You can call my office. You can send me an email. Go from there.
Awesome. Again, Adrienne, I appreciate it. This has been real fun.
Thank you very much, John. It's been nice.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Founding Partner Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts to stay up to date on the latest episodes. You can also connect with Jonathan on LinkedIn and check out the show notes with links to resources mentioned throughout our discussion by visiting www.lawfirmgc.com. We'll see you next time for more origin stories and insights from successful law firm founders.